Hello, beautiful souls. It is David Ault. If you are a regular follower of this YouTube channel and the gathering, you might be aware that it has been a while. Much going on personally in my life, as I'm sure it's also happening in rapid speed in your world as well. And at the same time, a lot of time overseas, particularly in India, working with my foundation and implementing programs in our schools, and also taking a few people on a personal retreat. And as I was experiencing all of that, I have been working with a particular phrase. We could call it a mantra that I heard from a podcast by one of my favorite spiritual teachers, and that is Ram Dass. And the phrase is this: everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. Everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. And as he was using this in this particular podcast from many decades ago, he would start to share examples for people coming up to him and go, Ram Dass, I live in New York City. It's so chaotic. It's so noisy. I can't meditate. And then he would say, everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. The point being that it has nothing to do with New York City. It has nothing to do with the density and the volume of the noise. It has everything to do with, if that's what you're looking for, then the human world becomes self-evident. It just mirrors back to you everything that you perceive to be true. And it's a great way. It was a kind of a beautiful, fresh way of really revitalizing this idea of the fact that we are all a part of this lawful motion, and the power that we have individually to get really clear on what it is that we want to see, what it is that we want to see with regards to harmony, intelligence, divine design, even in the midst of its absence. So that's a training, if you will. It's a willingness to not be seduced by surface condition and to be devoted, to be committed, to being able to see the solution or to see that harmony or to see that wholeness, even when it appears completely absent. Because as a follower of spiritual principles, particularly the one that says everything is God or all is one or love is the only reality, then that's a practice that you and I must engage in every single day, because it isn't self-evident to the human eye. So you might say that it's hidden. It's hidden from the density of that particular perception, the perception of the human eye. But it is really constant. It's a mainstay with regards to capital R reality. So we can either make that arduous and painful, or we can look at it almost like a beautiful kind of game where every day, no matter how loud and how noisy the outer world can be, we have the opportunity to be willing vessels to see beyond appearances, to know that everything is not as it seems. And if the substance of all of life is predicated on oneness, then I am devoted to seeing that, to speaking that, to perceiving that, to being that in a world that oftentimes feels void of such a thing. So we went on this retreat in India, and I thought that I would sit with and be guided to share a word for the day that would sort of be the cornerstone of what we would be looking for each day. And the first day was grace. As you can imagine, in all the things that you've read about India and and its human chaos, it's all true. It's all there. There's so much going on all at once. And yet, underneath all of that, You will hear many, many people talk about their spiritual awakenings or their experiences of being able to look at the chaos and see the harmony and the beauty in all of it. Sometimes that's more difficult than other times. Sometimes when you're staring in the face of extreme poverty or extreme inconvenience with regards to time and travel and all the other things that we become very conditioned in trying to avoid, then this idea of grace seems pretty ludicrous. But we would take the phrase, everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. So the first word of the day was grace. If the only thing is grace that I'm looking for, then grace is what I see. It's what I experience. And we talked a lot about what does grace mean to you. I find it to be a word that is beyond definition. I find it to be something that reminds me that no matter how I feel about myself, how much I champion my limitations or argue for my limitations or secretly hold some type of contempt for this or shame or guilt, that this vitality or this energy called grace knows nothing of that. I shared with the people on the retreat a funny story that Ram Dass used to talk about when he was going to leave India and come back to the United States after his big epiphany. And he was before Neem Karoli Baba, the man who became his guru. And he was afraid. He was afraid to leave India where everything had been stripped away from him and he was experiencing unconditional love for the first time in his life. He was afraid to come back to the U.S. because he was afraid he would lose it, or it would fade, or that he was actually too impure to be able to even sustain the things that he had experienced. And he went to Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba, and he just, he sort of fell at his feet in tears, going, I'm afraid to leave. I'm too impure. I'm too impure. I'm too void of the discipline of maintaining this. And Neem Karoli Baba picked him up by the shoulders and got right into his face and started pulling his hair and his beard and looking up his nose and being very playful and comical, turning him around and looking at all of his limbs and arms and everything. And he said, impure? I don't see anything impure. And that's what grace is. It has no understanding of you as impure. It has no understanding or even registering of you as being filled with fault. There's no scorecard keeping. It only sees, perceives you, and knows you as an energy of love. Now, that same teaching has been associated with master teachers like Jesus and all other of these saints and sages who operate from that oneness level of only recognizing you as the wholeness that you are. Everything else is conceptual, everything else is made up, everything is held on by us, but it has no bearing in truth whatsoever as to who you are and what your true nature is. So we had fun with that one. Everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. If grace is the only thing that I'm looking for, then grace becomes the action, it becomes the feedback, it becomes the lived experience of everything reminding us that we are whole, complete, and perfect. And it was very powerful, and I thought, okay, this is good. Picking a word like this and practicing it with this mantra of everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for was really powerful. And then the next day was the word fully. So fully has been a word that I have used a lot this year with regards to slowing down and recognizing that oftentimes we are not present. We're doing something and the mind is already checked out and focusing on what all the other things on a perceived to-do list are. And we are never fully engaged. And when we become aware of this and we become willing to slow down and to practice what it means to do things fully, then that is everything from the way in which you and I make a cup of coffee in the morning, the way in which you and I cross a room, the focus on the steps. It's a lot of the beautiful exercises that Thich Nhat Hanh in Plum Village used to have people that would visit. They would go on these Buddhist meditation walks, and it was really an exercise in doing something fully, mindfully. Heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe. And even though that might sound simplistic, this idea of fully, you begin to see how disconnected we are to that. We're in a world where multitasking is glorified. We're in a world where thought has oftentimes become so untrained that we're just on automatic. And so in India, one of the days that we were doing things fully, it was about focusing on a conversation and finishing that conversation. It was about when I'm in relationship with another being and they're speaking to me, I give them my full attention. When I am engaged in a meditative breath exercise, I just focus on the simplicity of the sensation of the breath as it's coming through my nose. As we are traveling to a site or a place that I wanted to take them to that had significant meaning, it was being there fully without looking at a phone or a watch or becoming too distracted. And that was a powerful day as well, because when you think about this human, I'm going to call it a need, the human need to be seen and heard. Oftentimes, when one is seen and heard from a state that is fully present, then it's almost as if we are filled up. We are in an engagement that is reminding us of our wholeness because we are being seen. We feel valued. We feel as though there is meaning to our beingness in life, rather than sort of discarding things. And to the degree that we are discarding others by not being fully present is the degree that we get the same thing. So everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. If the only thing I'm seeing is fullness and presence in that moment, then that's what I experience. And that was awesome as well. There were 4 of these. The third one then was expansion. I decided to use the word expansion as an exercise based upon a class that I gave this year where there were 2 examples of energy that were presented. And it said, if you want to really kind of get a simplistic idea of what enlightenment means, or to participate in enlightened things, then do a sort of mental test where you go, does this feel restrictive or does this feel expansive? Anything that is restrictive is not in alignment with your evolution. Anything that is expansive pretty much is your direction, your signal to go that way. And what's interesting about the word expansion is oftentimes things that feel scary are actually expansive. But we will sometimes mask those things and want to label them as restrictive, when really it's the calling, it's the beckoning to grow into the more of what we already are. And so you have to work with that distinction. Everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. If the only thing is expansion that I'm looking for, then expansion is what I see. That was another great one. And finally, this is a very sort of unique word that I need to give a little bit of clarification to. And the fourth and final word for the retreat was penance. Penance. The reason that I use the word penance is because in Hindu culture, it means an entirely different thing than probably what you are accustomed to thinking that it means. Penance is not self-punishment. It isn't something that you and I have to do in order to make up or appease some outer external God for our waywardness. It isn't self-punishment. It's more a self-cleansing. And so to be in penance is like sadhana. It's daily practice. It's a commitment to the steady devotion of keeping the inner space clean. And a lot of times in the Hindu practices of penance, it's really a loyalty. It's a loyalty and a devotion to being the cleanest, clearest vessel for the one that one can be. And so there are great stories of how many of these ascended beings, people that have transcended the limitedness of being human, have transcended that, have had these long extended periods of penance where they've gone into caves, or they've done this deep committed meditation, quiet, no speaking time. And what was really fascinating was on the day that we were really kind of looking at, well, what does penance mean for me? It really was the culmination of all the other words. It was giving ourselves grace. It was engaging in life fully. It was monitoring our decision making and leaning more into things that were expansive. And all those things combined were a form of a curriculum, if you will, of penance. On that day, I took them several hours to a village called Padampuri, where there is a sadhu that lives in a temple there. And while we were in his presence and while we had visited that temple, off in the distance in the winding mountain roads of the Himalayas, there was a man walking with this big flag. And he was really noticeable because the vibrant colors of the flag were very much in contrast with the kind of dirt brown tinge colored of the mountains. And everybody started to see him off in the distance and started to talk. And when I asked, what's that? Someone said, oh, that man is engaged in his penance. And I told the group, and I said, isn't that wild? And they go, this is a rare thing. Very rarely do you see someone doing penance publicly. But the choice of this particular idea of walking with this flag across many states, the states in India, long distances, is a form of practice of relinquishing the needs of self and opening oneself up to the receivership and the good that comes naturally. But you don't see that much anymore. And people at the temple were talking about, oh my God. And of course we all were like, everywhere you look, you see what you're looking for. If the only thing is examples of penance or pure cleansing of self is what you're looking for, then that's what you will see. And there it was. So I'm delighted to come back and to share that experience with you, to offer you those 4 words plus that phrase, and to see what words you might want to add to that. So those words were grace, those words were fully, those words were expansion and penance. And when you think about those, coupled with everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. You get to ask yourself, what am I looking for? If freedom is really what I'm looking for, then everywhere I look, I see if the only thing is freedom that I'm looking for, then freedom is what I will see. Empowerment, grace, love, God, whatever word comes to you, work with that. And I feel very, very strongly that just like we experienced in India and our Quiet on the Inside retreat, that you too will begin to see the beautiful reciprocity of that level of committed energy to seeing solution, to seeing God in everything that exists.